Hi, I'm Jim McCann, founder of 1-800-Flowers. I'm not satisfied when I learn something new unless I share it forward. And so we created this podcast to continue that, to share forward the wonderful people we get to meet and most importantly get to learn from and make our lives richer and better. Together we'll cover the human experience. And for me, the human experience is foundational in the idea of relationships. The topics will be far-reaching, but common element you'll see here is it's all about relationships. So I invite you to join us on this journey. Come experience it with us, share your thoughts and ideas, and become part of our community. We'd love to have you. Dr. Chloe, let's take us back. Tell us where you grew up.
Sure. So I grew up in Holland, Michigan. So I came from Michigan. And when I was 8 years old, I told everybody I was going to move to New York and be on television. And yet then somehow it actually happened. So that was pretty amazing.
And from Holland, Michigan, where did you then go to school?
Well, then I went to Chicago and I started school there. And then I actually didn't finish college till I was 29 at Columbia University in New York. And then I went on to get the PhD. And in the middle, I was a yoga teacher, which is, I think, where I started to get really interested in the way that people can control their body and control their mind.
Wow, that's an interesting path. Columbia, no easy task to get into.
No, and it's so funny, Jim, for a long time, I really, like I said, I didn't even finish college till I was 29. I used to think I didn't have a whole lot of academic ability, believe it or not. And I really do credit, the power of lists and the power of just having people around you that will lift you up and remind you that, yes, you can, because I not only did it, but I went on to get a PhD, and now I totally love academia. So there you go.
Good for you. Now tell us, as that 8-year-old, when you were thinking you were going to move to New York and become a famous TV person, what were you thinking of? Famous for what?
I think at that age, I just liked the idea of being able to connect with large groups of people. And I think that was partly my interest in psychology too, was just about wanting to connect with people. And, as a little girl in Holland, Michigan, it's a very small town. There wasn't a lot of opportunities to connect with lots of people. And so somehow I think being in New York and being on television, I felt like that would happen.
Well, indeed it has.
Yeah.
And your book, Nervous Energy and Harness the Power of Your Anxiety, is such a cognitive speed bump. Wait a minute, there's some good here? I'm anxious, or that can be a good thing. I think that's such a turning point for people, because what you do is you teach people to work on themselves and to understand what they're going through and compartmentalize, and then start to break down the pieces they can influence and the pieces they can't. It's so important. I'll take it for instance, when the thing that saved aviation and really made it so much safer is a simple thing called checklists. And I think it originated in World War II when so many planes were crashing in the Pacific, and they did a study, psychologists did a study as to why that was happening. And what they determined was people in moments of crisis or anxiety, stress, were forgetting steps. And so they went to the concept of a checklist, which of course has gone way beyond aviation to include operating theaters and things like that. I think you're providing us all with a form of checklist where here's what we should do. And in a time of stress, we might skip a step or think, oh, I don't need to do that. I know that. And isn't that you're giving us a checklist for how to manage that stress, how to manage that anxiety?
Yes, Jim. So that's exactly right. And I learned something new as well. Every time I talk to you, I didn't know that the aviation industry actually kind of invented that concept. But yes, you're exactly right. Because in those moments of stress, that's when, the proverbial mind goes blank, or, even our focus will actually get more narrow. Even our physical gaze focus will get more narrow. And all we can see and think about is the issue in front of us. And so having those helpful checklists of saying, oh, wait a minute, there are things I can do that will affect this situation, and then making sure that we do the actions instead of just going into fight, flight, or freeze. We want to identify which things are in our control and which things are not in our control, right? So we all know that wonderful serenity prayer about God granting us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change. So the first step in getting there is to separate it out and identify what are the parts we can change and what are the parts we cannot. So of any particular worry or concern, we first divide it up into the parts we can control and the parts we cannot control. The next step is, I think, one of the most important parts, which is by the parts that we can control, we have to literally write down 1 or 2 key words about what actions we can take to control them, right? So you gave the example of moms at the office, and of course, I'm a mom as well. So when I'm thinking about, maybe getting my child to do certain things, I have to write down the behaviors I can do that will encourage that. And then whenever I feel restless about wanting to make sure my son gets where he needs to be developmentally, instead of just getting stuck in the worry, I go to the action section of my zone of control chart, and I use that nervous energy to start doing helpful actions.
A concern I have, and I wonder if it's proper or founded, that is, sometimes we use definitions or phrases to try and own a situation. Some people could argue that, if we can't understand something, as long as we can give it a name, we think we can control it. The opposite of that, the consequence of that sometimes is, I think we're too quick to name things. And well, if that's anxiety, then this is how it behaves. Your work seems to be to help people not just to simplistically label something, and to think about what are the emotions around it, what are the consequences, and if it is X, how do we move forward? So when you and I think we do that with kids too often. It's ADD. Oh, fine. Now I understand it. I can control it. Is there a consequence of too quick to define?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, Jim. And that's actually a big source of debate and discussion within the scholarly community of psychologists, right? Is because a term like ADD, in some senses, it's just descriptive. It's just describing a cluster of symptoms, but it's not necessarily really saying anything about what created that cluster of symptoms. And so you're exactly right that putting labels on things can be helpful because it helps us to organize and define things.
Yes.
But what it also can do is it can externalize the thing, right? So we can start talking about it almost like the weather, like, oh, it's raining today, I need my umbrella, or, oh, I have anxiety, I'm going to take this pill or whatever. And by the way, nothing wrong with taking a pill, whatever works for people, I'm 100% into. But what I think they miss sometimes is the opportunity of the struggle, is the opportunity of actually learning and working and getting to know yourself better as you come to understand, like, oh, gee, I guess the reason I get so panicked is because I have this big fear of failure. And instead of just numbing my awareness of that fear, what if I explored the fear and took it as an opportunity to build deeper confidence? That's what a lot of, kind of leaning into the anxiety and not being afraid of it can help people and discover there's actually, oftentimes there's big sources of energy that we have there that we don't want to miss out on.
I think that's the big takeaway for me of this project of yours, this book, because it so simplifies the whole idea. But when you said that, as you just did, that anxiety creates energy, that can either be directed in a negative way, or you can harness that, as you say in your subtitle, harness that and make it a part of your positive response to the circumstance. I think that's such a powerful message. And I think it could help so many people. Just that turning the phrase and say, wait a minute, of course we all have anxiety, but it also gets your engine going, and that engine's going to produce some energy And how do we use that?
It is so true, Jim. So you're right. It's that fundamental shift just in the way we frame it, because a lot of people, when they start to feel anxious, otherwise, they begin to actually get anxious about feeling anxious. They're like,
Yes.
oh no, dun, dun, dun. Like, I'm feeling anxious. This must be
Oh,
bad.
I'm going to have a fear of flying, and I'm a fearful of the fear kind of thing. Is that it?
And they spend so much energy trying to manage the anxiety that it's like they waste the gift of the anxiety, which is actually putting a little fire under them to have a little boost, almost like a blue light special of productivity energy. And why waste that on just getting nervous about being nervous when that little nervous energy boost is actually that little extra set of wings that you need to go get something done? The very first technique in my book is a mindfulness technique. And for anyone who hears the word mindfulness and thinks, oh no, new age, woo-woo stuff, mindfulness meditation, let me quickly just say that mindfulness is actually, in my view, almost the same thing as metacognition. So if metacognition sounds like a more intellectual or scientific term, then we'll just call it metacognition, which is thinking about your thoughts. But, anyway, Harvard Medical School, Johns Hopkins, all these places have research on mindfulness, because mindfulness metacognition helps us to choose the right tool from our toolbox. First, what we have to do is we have to really study the problem. So there's techniques in the book that are all about learning to just slow yourself down and get your mind off a stressful topic. And sometimes that is the best thing to do. Other times, that is actually going to make your anxiety worse, because if your anxiety is kind of tickling your brain because there's something that needs your attention, then practicing an anxiety technique about just letting go is actually counterproductive. That would be like plugging your ears when the smoke alarm goes off, So the first step is to actually study the anxiety. And I sometimes call that dialoguing with it. So when you feel that butterflies in your stomach or racing thoughts, the first thing I would suggest people do is actually congratulate themselves, because, to Jim's point earlier, a lot of us have such a negative attitude about anxiety, or we're ashamed of it, or we're afraid of it. So first we want to congratulate ourselves on saying, okay, great, I'm aware of it. I've noticed it. I'm having a burst of anxiety. I'm going to study it. What can I do with it? So that kind of sets us up in the right spot. And then we ask the anxiety, what is it that you want? What is it that you need? And if the anxiety says, well, I just want to know that the job application I submitted last week is going to be successful, then that's when you do that zone of control and you say, okay, well, there's nothing more I can really do about that one right now. So now I know that the best anxiety management technique is going to be one to help me get my mind on other things. But if the anxiety says, I just really want to know the job application that you're about to submit is going to be successful, then you would say, okay, well, there probably is something more I can still do about that application. So let me review it and see what more I can do about it. So then we would use a technique that I like from the book called the new mental shortlist, right? So what we can get our minds into these cognitive habits where, suppose in that job application example, maybe for a period of time, it was actually very helpful for your mind to just auto track onto that job application whenever you had an extra moment. Just think about that application and what more you can do. And so your mind developed this habit that once served you. But the moment you press apply and click and done, then your mind is just stuck with this old habit that's no longer serving you. And the thing about smart, high-functioning people is that our minds can be like a dog with a bone, right? So our minds are just going on this topic and it's not helping us anymore. So the mental shortlist technique is where we come up with 5 really good alternative topics. Could be getting a jump on your holiday shopping, could be reaching out to certain friends and family that you never seem to keep up with enough. But we need 5 items listed in advance. So that way, when the kind of thought monster strikes and we're just trying to ruminate on some old topic, we give ourselves 5 other really good topics to pivot onto. It's so much easier to leave behind an old topic when we have a good one to come onto. So we're not doing the don't think about pink elephants thing.
I like that you touch in the book on the fact that it's not just in your head. What I mean by that is you get into the relationship between the body and the mind and how you can do things physically to manage, understand, and control your anxieties. And I'll confess to you, Meredith and I use this a lot. We'll have a phone call, and afterwards you'll say to me, how many pages? Because it helps you to, both of us coincidentally use it as a learning technique to take notes frequently. And you talk about, you're, I can tell by the things you've written here, that you're a list person. And tell us a little bit about the relationship between the writing, the page, and the mind, and be able to control things. So I'm a crazy list maker. Tell us about lists and the learning function.
Yeah, lists are so important, Jim, for so many reasons. So, I mean, first of all, it frees up your working memory, which is one of our most precious resources. Our working memory is in our executive lobe of our brain, which is so important. And if we're trying to even take up that important real estate by just trying to remember certain steps we need to take or certain things we need to do, we're depriving ourselves of some of that higher order energy. So that's one simple good reason to make a list. Another thing I really like about making lists, especially with the pen like you had in your hand, Jim, I mean, you know, lists are fine on the computer, the phone, but when we can do them in our own handwriting, we actually get to see more about how we're feeling about what we're writing, right? So when you create a list and then you look at it later, you can tell based on the way you wrote that list how you were feeling and what was in your mind. And
we all develop our little shorthand codes.
It's true. It's true. And then it also creates what psychologists call environmental cues. So suppose that you're doing like a list of all of your feelings and things that you've learned and things that you want to remember about a certain situation. When you look at that list in your own handwriting, it'll actually cue you back to the emotional experiences and thoughts you were having. That's why people have, you know, handwriting analysis, right? Because it tells us a lot, and you don't need to be a professional handwriting analyst to be able to look at your own handwriting and know what you were kind of thinking and feeling. So that's another good reason, if you can, to make the list, you know, in your own actual handwriting. And one final good reason, Jim, that I love lists is it helps us to stay focused. So we don't have to constantly reinvent the wheel and think about, you know, what should I be doing next, or where should I focus, or where's my place in time. With a good list, all you have to do is just keep your eyeballs pointed at that list and keep doing things on that list, and you'll get where you need to go. So it takes a lot of the stress away.
Dr. Chloe, why does it feel so good to be able to cross those things out?
Yes, well, it feels good, and that's a good thing, right? We want to capitalize and exploit that in a good way, is that it does feel good to cross things off because we know we're keeping a commitment to ourselves, and that we increase what psychologists call our feeling of self-efficacy, and that inspires us to know that we can do more and feel proud and feel good about ourselves.
Yeah, you're right, though. After you get done with that page, that ripping up thing is so satisfying.
Yes.
Plus, it gives me a little bit more sense of control.
Yeah.
You know, on the weekend, if I take all these notes and I reorganize them, and then I finish the last cross out on the page and I rip that one up and I get rid of that, it just gives me maybe a false sense, but certainly a sense of some organization, some control. I have the right priorities. We can all fall into the trap, too, of being a little guilty of doing the easy things because we want that line through it drawn.
But you know, Jim, there's nothing so wrong with that. I actually did and do keep two lists. So I actually do keep one list of cognitively demanding hard things to do. And then to your point, Jim, I actually do keep a list of the easier things to do, because we all have times, right, when maybe we're kind of in a little bit of an afternoon slump or whatever the case may be. And I don't really feel like, you know, rewriting War and Peace for the day, so to speak. I just need to do some of that kind of brainless admin that maybe on other days I would say, oh, I don't feel like that, it's so boring. But if I have a good list of even the boring stuff that I know where to go when it's time for that sort of energy, it actually helps me. And I hope you saw the to-do list with emotions task in the book as well.
Yeah, I did. Chapter 10.
Yes.
But who's counting?
Well, who's counting? Exactly. I put all my favorite techniques in the book.
As you were finishing this book with all the wonderful tips here, it seems like your early days of being a yoga teacher break out several times here. And you talk a lot about breathing and understanding your depth of breath and how that can impact your level of anxiety, your level of calm. A little bit there, if you would, Dr. Chloe, about using the 3-part breath technique.
Yeah, Jim. So I love the 3-part breath. And I do think that breathing is so important. It's so foundational, just that basic thing again about even just feeling in control. And a lot of people will tell me, they're like, oh, well, Chloe, I've tried deep breathing before, so I'm not sure that one's for me. And I just want people to know that there's many, many ways to do deep breathing. So when people tell me that, I usually discover that they've been doing a gaping breath where they're just like, and I'm like, of course, that's not helping you. It's just making you feel hyperventilating. So when we do the 3-part breath that I describe in the book, it requires enough of a cognitive, attention that it interrupts any, negative thoughts or anxious thoughts, which is really good. And then it teaches you really specifically how to get the 3 points in your body that do need the breath the most. I'm just touching them myself even because that breath saved my life so many times. It saved me. I had a panic attack on the Nancy Grace show on national television once, and that breath just saved my life. So I have so many good things to say about that breath.
I love that you named the book Nervous Energy, because you could have gone more clinical. Because what I was thinking about when I knew you were working on this is, A, I couldn't wait to read it myself, and B, there's so many people, family and friends, that I'd like to share it with. And you titled it appropriately enough that it's appropriate to share without wondering, am I going to be perceived as being critical of someone? Say, hey, you need help.
No, I'm so glad you said that, Jim, because you're so right. And, to me, one of the most important parts of the book is framing this to people, that this book is for what psychologists call high functioning people, which is, to you and me and so many members of your community through Worth and through 1-800-Flowers. We don't realize that we're high functioning, but if you're able to say, set an alarm and wake up at, 8 in the morning and be where you need to go and have a couple decent relationships, you're a high functioning person. And high functioning people, or you're probably a high functioning person, and high functioning people tend to be high on conscientiousness and thinking ahead about the future, which is a blessing or a curse if it goes a little haywire. And so that's what the book is about, is learning how to tell people, you know what, you are doing so well, you're doing so great, you have so many cognitive gifts. We just need to make sure you have kind of the owner's manual for how to really optimize them. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with you, and there's nothing wrong with having anxiety. And I think that's a really helpful starting point to just humanize this.
I love that, an operating manual for the mind and body. It's so true. But this is a book I'll want to share with a lot of folks, because you make everything so practical. Thanks. And you it's not dumb it down, but you make it everyday explainable. And just the title and the subtitle tell you everything. We're going to have anxiety, and that creates energy. We can either let that energy run amok and cause problems, or we can harness it for good. And that's
so well said. That's exactly it.
It's such a simple but important and thoughtful message. And we're so glad that we've had an opportunity to get to know you. And we feel like we're friends. And we've never met in person. Personally, you come recommended by someone I like and respect who introduced us. But you're so easy to get to know. You're the kind of person everyone wants to hang around with, because not only is it fun and interesting, but you make us smarter and more emotionally mature just for hanging around you.
Wow, Jim, thank you. I'm going to ride high on that compliment all day. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Good. Well, we hope there's lots and lots of occasions for us to get together in the future. I think your book is going to be a big success for a long time. And I know I can think of a couple of dozen end tables that it's going to be on for people in my life, because it's been such a help to me. I want to share that help with others.
Thank you so much, Jim.
Well, I hope you enjoyed what you heard, and I know I'll be sharing it forward. I hope you get to as well. Let's keep the conversation going. Follow me along on Twitter at Jim1800Flowers and on LinkedIn at Jim McCann. Hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to Celebrations Chatter. You can join our community by reaching out at chatter@celebrations.com. And while you're at it, Tell us what topics you'd like us to explore here on the Celebrations Chatter podcast. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to share it forward.